Our story begins with a man named John Mello, born August 8, 1960. Although difficult to verify, according to John, he had an illustrious career within the music industry as a producer, working alongside artists such as Elton John and the Rolling Stones. John has a less than positive track record when it comes to married life. His first marriage in 1983 to a woman named Linda ended with a restraining order against him due to threats he was making that affected her sense of safety and privacy. John's second wife, Cassandra, marks a time period where the man received a litany of charges against him for harassing and threatening numerous people, from gas workers who were verbally abused over a service disconnection, and claims of blackmail from a man who rejected him for a music producer job. The harassment against this individual is quite extensive, in fact, and within the complaints there were Facebook posts, countless emails, and multiple threats of bodily harm. Within this harassment campaign, documented, there's multiple emails which were sent to the prospective employer. The emails, though, were sent from various different addresses. When looked into, it's discovered that each aggressive email had all originated from John Mello, masquerading as different people. At this point in time, John's harassment of Greenville, South Carolina businesses was so widespread and well known that there was a Facebook page dedicated to exposing his antics. The name of the page, humorously enough, was Operation Melodrama. In 2015, his wife Cassandra files for divorce, and from all sources of information that I could find, it appears, by this time, he had already jumped into a relationship with a woman whom he had a daughter with prior to his divorce. According to the information I found, John met this woman, named Christina Parcell, around 2008, and they had begun dating back then. This would put their relationship within the timeline of he being married still to his second wife, Cassandra. John and Christina are described to have had an incredibly contentious relationship, marred by allegations of domestic violence and argument. Despite this, a child is welcomed into their family in 2012, but by 2015, this relationship had well and truly soured, and the two separate. October of 2015, John files for custody over their daughter, and in January 2016, he's granted sole custody. Christina Parcell, born in 1980, is about 20 years younger than John, and she works as a vet tech. She's described by her colleagues as empathetic, friendly, warm and positive. According to Christina's own words, at the time of separating from John, she had a general disinterest in having children, and this contributed to why she freely gave up custody to him. Christina appeared to be content not seeing her daughter until late 2016, when she begins to date a man named Bradley Post. Brad Post, also about 20 years Christina's senior, is a wealthy man. He had known her for around 20 years after the two met at her father's cigar shop. They dated for a short period of time back then, but Brad describes that there was no chemistry, so it fizzled out. The two remained in contact as friends, but didn't have much to do with one another until her separation from John in 2015. At that time, they bonded once more and formed a new relationship. When she had become romantically involved with Mr. Post, or around this time anyway, Christina files for visitation rights, and she is awarded scheduled visitation with her then almost 4-year-old daughter. This marks the beginning of what is to be an incredibly nasty custody dispute that lasts for many years. As the battles go on, John has major issues with his ex-partner having any sort of access to their daughter. He attempts to revoke Christina's visitation rights by alleging that she and Bradley Post had engaged in inappropriate behavior and abuse towards the young girl. Despite numerous attempts to convey to authorities that Bradley and Christina are a danger to the child, the allegations aren't substantiated, and life proceeds on, with John having full custody and Christina visitation. The day is October 4th, 2020. John, an Italian citizen, makes the decision to move to Italy with his young daughter, and he doesn't tell Christina that he's doing this.
The worst thing I ever knew about Christina and Brad was they took a shower with my daughter and got in bed together, according to her. Okay? That's the extent of my knowledge of how bad they were, and that's why I left. And I went to DSS. No one's gonna help me.
I wanted her to be away from these people, and I wanted her to have a better life. And free education, free university anywhere in Europe, healthcare for me and everything. And that was my retirement.
Christina's sister, Tina, describes how her family had learned about this move.
How did you find out that your niece was in Italy?
Her father posted a photo on Facebook of her standing in, I think, like a cobblestone plaza type situation. It was nighttime. There was a banner on the wall behind her that said the name Rovigo, Italy. And once we began searching down that rabbit hole, we found an online news article.
And were you having any contact with your niece at that time?
First time my sister got to speak with my niece was Christmas Day of 2020, so it had been 2.5 months.
Without getting into the complicated details of how this lengthy and complex custody dispute unfolded, essentially, Christina works alongside the Italian government to get her daughter back, after 6 months of heated legal battle, which involved 2 separate trips to Italy that Christina made. The child is returned to the United States under the care of her mother, and an indictment for custodial interference is issued against John. At this time, John is unable to return to the United States due to some unresolved criminal matters, which I could not find further information on what they were, and he grows incredibly frustrated that his daughter is now in the full-time care of her mother. When Christina had returned from Italy with her daughter, Bradley Post meets the two at the airport, and he proposes to Christina in front of a big group of people. She accepts, and with her daughter, moves into a house with her sister Tina.
Who all lived there?
I was in the master bedroom, a nice tan with wood trim and a bay window. My sister was across the hall in a not great yellow bedroom. My niece was down the hall from her in what came as a hot pink bedroom. That she was thrilled about that. So it was the 3 of us.
Christina and Tina, although living together, are described to have been building their relationship back up after some rocky times. When Christina was in the relationship with John Mello, he had gotten her to cut ties with her family, and she didn't communicate with them for a period of around 4 years. Following the separation from John, Christina had been working hard to reconnect with her family, and living with her sister, who was helping her out, was a good step towards rebuilding bridges that had once been broken. While she lives with her sister and John is still in Italy, the custody battles are still ongoing, which Bradley Post describes as being a major difficulty within his relationship with Christina. John Mello was exhausting, and the sole focus of Christina's life had become this dispute over her daughter. On the morning of June 30th, Bradley Post receives an envelope in the mail, and inside are nude photos of Christina, along with a link to an escort service website, which indicates that Christina once worked within the sex industry. When the link is followed, it does indeed lead to an escort service website, but there are no mentions of Christina Parcell, or what the envelope indicates, her sex worker name to be, Christina Warren. She's not found anywhere on this site. Later on, when the package is brought to police, they suspect that the sender of these documents had falsified the information within. They used private photos that they had of Christina, and then repurposed them to make it look as though she worked as an escort.
Who was in the photo?
Christina Parcell.
And did you notice anything about how it's cut and pasted?
Yes, sir, I did.
What did you notice?
So, first thing I noticed is that the margins are off. The photo of Miss Parcell is too far to the left. And then at the top of the advertisement, you can see where it looks like they cut and pasted it, but they left a couple other, where your finger is. Maybe those were letters or some other part of the web page that they just didn't cut off.
Alongside these nude photos and a link to the escort service, there is also a list of other names and addresses included within the package, and it's believed that the contents of this delivery will be sent to other people.
While you were guarding ad litem, did you ever receive some, let's just say, suspect envelopes in the mail?
Yes.
generally, what were the contents of this envelope?
They involved pictures of Christina Parcell in various states of undress. One included a male anatomy body part in one of the pictures. They were basically pornographic in nature.
Included in the list are Christina's workmates, neighbours, a bar that she would frequent, lawyers, and more. It's believed by most, including law enforcement, that John sent this package out.
This would be in line with also what he emailed, how he conducted himself. He was determined to discredit and disparage and ruin the reputation and character of the mother. He was in a custody battle, so he was determined for her to be thought of in a certain light and hopefully be determined to be unfit.
So at the time you received these, let's say in July and August of 2021, what is the posture of the custody dispute?
We were just moving right along. I think I'd had the motion for him to have a psychological evaluation. The mother had custody at that time. Of course, even though I had reason to be concerned about Mr. Mello and how he conducted himself, I also had a duty to investigate the allegations he was making against the mother. And I did that to the best of my ability. I've never done this before, but I actually hired a private investigator to look into things for me. I tried to find out if there was anything true about the allegations he was making, because this little girl was in that woman's home. And her interests were my duty. So I tried my best to interview people, research, work with the private investigator. Of course, I talked to the mother about the pictures and determined they were very old and in a consensual setting. So I did look into these things. I didn't just write them off because he was, so unstable.
Based on his prior record of harassing individuals, it appears that John was doing what he has done in the past, harassing the people who are causing him trouble. Due to this behaviour, everyone is gradually becoming more and more concerned that the man could be dangerous.
Did y'all ever fear for your safety or anybody, or your niece's safety, or your safety?
We wouldn't let her play outside by herself. It is a beautiful neighborhood, an exceedingly safe neighborhood. I mean, kids everywhere. So it's not that the neighborhood wasn't safe. We just didn't want her to be playing by herself. We didn't want her to get taken. The front window, part of why we always left it open was so we could see the front yard if she was out there.
Lining up with his behaviour becoming increasingly erratic over time, John made a habit out of harassing the child advocate attorney that was working for his daughter.
He was continuing to communicate, harass, threaten, intimidate, bully. His communications were unlike anything I've ever encountered as a guardian, and so they continued to escalate, and I was pretty concerned.
What kinds of things was he conveying to you?
He would tell me that I always needed to be looking over my shoulder, that he was coming after my license, that I was going to get arrested for criminal charges or civil charges, that I was definitely going to jail. He mentioned my children to me by name with specific information about them at one visitation I had with him. He put terrible things on the internet about me, including my office address and phone number. He actually included my husband in his posts. He said awful things, that we were trafficking children, Ukrainian children, through Spartanburg. That's like on the internet. It was Facebook and Reddit, and at one point he had said I was manufacturing child pornography in my law office and put my address and my phone number right there. So he was definitely fired up. I would start receiving emails early on, not just from Mr. Mello, but from other people on his behalf. multiple different, one was an attorney, one was a private investigator, allegedly, one was a saint, one was, they were just multiple people that would email me from different addresses with very similar threats and characterizations of me and the litigation. And they would definitely be arguing on behalf of Mr. Mello.
Would you attempt to follow up with these individuals when they reached out to you?
Yes, I would typically try and return an email, try and find out who the sender was, try and verify if they were real. We had suspicions that many of them were Mr. Mello himself because of the way the emails were worded. He used a lot of the same phrasing. He writes in a very unusual manner using capitals at different times and has absolutely terrible spelling. So we could see a lot of similarities in these third-party emails, which caused us to believe they were likely him. And then, like for instance, if an attorney emailed me and I couldn't find that attorney anywhere, or a private investigator emailed me and I never could find that private investigator, I really was left with the only conclusion that it was likely Mr. Mello.
What findings did you make as to the lengths that Mr. Mello would go to get custody back?
He was very clear that there was nothing off limits. He was, like I said, threatening, harassing, intimidating, and he was consistently doing it, these hundreds and hundreds of emails. Sometimes he was represented by attorneys, sometimes he was not. And this was the worst case I've ever worked on as far as representing a child's interest, but at the same time having a parent act like that.
Speaking of these emails you received from third parties, what were some of those parties, or those individuals, purported individuals, that you could recall?
There was an attorney named Sophia Carlucci. There was an investigator. The email said Mullins Investigations. There was a saint.
Did he ever mistakenly send an email?
Yes, there was an email one time from Sophia Carlucci, from John, I think, in Sophia Carlucci's email. So it's like he was emailing me, but he used Sophia Carlucci's name and information.
That now leads us into the date, October 13th, 2021. Christina is home alone following an early morning job interview, and her daughter was at school, her sister Tina at work. Brad Post had contacted Christina in the early morning hours to make sure she was up for the interview, and they talked for a few minutes. At 9:30 a.m., he tries to call her again, but no answer, and by 11 a.m., he feels like something is wrong. Bradley decides to head over to Christina's place to check out what's going on. Shortly after he arrives, he places a 911 call.
I just walked in, I smelled some weird smell, and it looks like she's bled out on the floor.
Is she breathing?
No.
Okay, then we need to turn her over, make sure she's flat on her back, and we're going to start CPR, sir.
Okay, I think she's gone. It looks like there's brain matter everywhere. It looks like somebody might have shot in the back. She won't respond. She's got her eyes open.
Eyes are open.
There's a lot of blood.
So it looks like somebody may have broke in and shot her in the head.
Maybe. I don't know.
Do you see anybody still nearby, an assailant or anything? No?
No.
Okay.
You got to come home right now. Emergency. I went to the door, no response, so the back door is always unlocked. Okay. So I walked around the back door. When I walked in, there was a smell, like a pesticide smell. And she's laying there on her back. It looks like there's either brain matter on the floor, or there's a lot of blood. It looks like she fell and was drugged.
Is there anybody else in the house? Any
No,
pets?
but there are 3 cats.
Did you talk to her this morning?
I talked to her this morning, yeah.
Okay. Sheriff's office? Do smell something.
We didn't see a gun or anything. We didn't touch her, so I don't know. But it's weird. You'll see where she was drugged.
I just talked to Tina, who is his sister, who's at work. She's coming home now. And I said, was there a rose? Did you see on the floor?
Yep, I saw it.
She said, I don't have any rose in the house.
Okay.
This is weird, dude.
It is weird.
Let's get out of here with that smell. Just lock it down. It's definitely not a death odor.
She's dead?
As far as I can tell, I'm not EMS, man. They should be here in just a second.
What's the...
And this is your girlfriend?
My fiance, but I didn't see my ring on her finger. Son of a... She's got a young daughter that's 9. There's been a custody battle. The father was in Italy.
Is he in Italy now?
And he's been threatening. Well, we don't know.
As far as Mr. Post is concerned, did he appear to have any blood on him? Anything like that?
No, he was dressed pretty nicely that day. Sports coat. Nice slacks. We cleared the residence. I located Miss Parcell in the living room. There was blood all over the floor. Looked like there was drag marks on the floor where she was had been drugged by her feet or drugged somehow. She had multiple lacerations around her upper, her face, her neck area.
When Bradley found the body of his fiancée, there was blood everywhere, and a strange detail: rose petals were scattered around the house. She had suffered 35 knife wounds, many of which were superficial and consistent with a struggle, but there was one to her jugular vein, a severe injury that led to her death. She had also sustained a multitude of blunt force trauma over her body, but mostly focused on her head. An investigation commences immediately. Ring camera footage is quickly obtained that shows a man riding a bike away from Christina's house at the time of the murder, and another camera from the other side of the street catches the moment when an unknown man enters Christina's residence. He approaches the front door, and appears he is let in without a struggle. Unable to identify the suspect from these cameras, police quickly turn their attention to John Mello, who at the time was still in Italy. Looking into his life, they learn that he still owns a home in the Greenville area, so the investigation focuses on a man who performs work around this house.
It was on October 22nd that myself and investigator Sparkman learned that Michael Manigault is somebody that was familiar with John Mello, and it was suggested that we speak with him.
Did you, in fact, try to go and locate Michael Manigault?
Yes, sir.
And where did you locate him?
So we were told that he rides the Greenlink buses, so we went around to some of their bus stops and we located him getting off a bus on Lawrence Road.
Please state your name for the record.
Michael Manigault.
Mr. Manigault, do you reside in Greenville County?
Yes, sir.
What do you do for a living?
Currently, I'm a photographer.
And how long have you been doing that?
Since I was 6 years old.
And what did you do for John Mello?
I was helping clean his house while he was out of town.
Okay. And how long did you do that?
On and off for several months.
Okay. And what kind of things would he ask you to do?
Yard work, cleaning up. He was moving back to Italy. He was helping me clean his house up so he could get ready for sale.
And what about, and how would he pay you?
Cash.
Back in 2020, 2021, did you meet Zach Hughes?
I met him while John was in Italy. And I did a little work around the house with Zach. That's about all I did with him.
So how did you meet Zach?
Through John.
Through John, and then did you and Zach work together?
On and off throughout a couple of days, yes, sir.
And then after October 13th, 2021, did you ever talk with investigators?
I was pulled over. I will get off the bus. I was stopped by 2 investigators at the vape store on Lawrence Road, taken back to the county that when I was there questioned if I had any involvement in the crime that I did not know I committed at the time.
And what did you tell them?
I had no idea the crime was committed. I willingly gave them my phone to go through it so they could check everything. I gave them all the access codes, everything. So I had no.
Voluntarily handed over your phone?
Yes, sir.
Did they ask you about any other associates that John Mello may have?
No, sir. Not from my recollection.
Well, did you not tell them about Zach Hughes?
I knew Zach Hughes, but that's to the point where I only knew Zach Hughes because of John Mello. I didn't know him before that or during the fact, after the fact.
No, but did you tell these investigators
that I worked with Zach Hughes? Yes, sir.
What did you tell them about
I only knew
John Mello and Zach Hughes?
I only know John Mello. I knew John Mello for years. I knew Zach Hughes for a brief period of time. This whole situation, I had no idea about the murder, none of that stuff.
So I began by just doing a basic Google search of something along the lines of Zachary Hughes, Greenville, South Carolina. The first thing I noticed is there were several articles online about him being a pianist, being famous for being able to play music by memory.
Now with a new name to look into, Zachary Hughes, it is learned that he lives in the Greenville area as well. Pulling up traffic cameras for the previous month, Zach's car had been photographed by license plate identifiers a total of 55 times. He drives a truck, and in only one of these photos is there a bike in the back, the day of the murder. A search warrant is drafted up for his property, and the bike in question is swiftly located. DNA evidence underneath Christina's fingernails are linked to Zach, and on November 3rd, 2021, he's arrested and charged with her murder. It's unclear exactly when he confessed, but by the time of Zachary's trial in February 2025, he pleads not guilty to murder, all the while admitting to killing Christina. He claims that he had an incredibly valid reason for doing so. Before taking a look at what the reason is, this brings us to the question, who is Zachary Hughes? Zach has an interesting backstory. Born early 1992 into a loving and religious family, Zach describes his childhood as being great. At 9 years old, he unearths a talent for music, and his family, being incredibly supportive, pays for piano lessons. He had one younger brother, and the family eventually settle in West Virginia on a 3.5-acre plot of farmland. His parents liked the idea of raising farm animals, and they believed this would give their children an opportunity to do physical work, to be close to nature, and to help them understand the value of hard work. In 2005, the church that Zachary's family attend had begun to encourage members to consider adoption. At this time, a photo was being passed around the church of 5 young Russian siblings who are orphaned. In this photo, their heads were all shaved due to having lice. They were all wearing the same clothes, and Zachary recalls that his parents' hearts broke for these young children. He states that the family prayed together, they thought about these children, and after much discussion, the decision was made to adopt the 3 boys and 2 girls, because if they didn't, they felt like no one else would. When the young children came to the Hughes household, the eldest Russian sibling was 10 years old, slightly older than Zachary. Her name was Yelena, but that is quickly changed to Grace, and from this point forward, it's described that Grace was an enormous problem for the family and for her other siblings.
I don't say this lightly, but my oldest sister Grace was the most evil human being I've ever met in my life. She was 10 when she came into our family. The Russian government didn't tell us much about the kids, so we weren't aware of any, if any, behavioral issues there may have been. And there were many, but specifically with her. I would describe her without reservation as an affectionless psychopath. Her emotional compass was seemingly non-existent. She was just dead inside. She was a masterful manipulator and deceiver. She could lie at the drop of the hat for reasons that might involve her personal gain or just for the heck of it. She would invent the most absurd, crazy, gruesome stories just to get a reaction out of people. And she could talk about this stuff with the same tone that you might talk about making a sandwich. And this from a girl that I knew between the ages of 10 to 14. It was incredibly disturbing, and the things I learned about that type of personality have stayed with me my entire life because I've never met someone like this since. She was literally like a vampire who would just suck the goodness out of other people around her. She could be very emotional, and she would fake these emotions in order to elicit a response in you, a sympathetic response. And if, for instance, you were accusing her of doing something like stealing or hurting one of her siblings, she would weep and just beg you to believe her and say, no, I didn't do it. And then if you would present her with irrefutable proof that we knew you had indeed done this, it was like a mask would just fall off her face. And I mean, she'd just look at you with shark eyes. One thing Grace was just, she had an addiction to doing was not merely stealing from you or sucker punching one of her siblings just to assert dominance or doing other terrible things to her siblings. She would recruit her other younger siblings to do these things for her. She would get off on making little duplicates of herself and training and enlisting her siblings to act as proxies for her so that she wouldn't actually get in trouble, because she knew that we all had our eyes on her because of her behavior, and we knew we couldn't trust her. You want to believe that, there's redemption for someone like this, and that they might change their ways and become a better person. And she knew that. And she would use that in order to ingratiate herself again and regain our trust, only to betray that trust again harder than she had the first time. And this happened dozens of times, and it created an incredible amount of strife in our home. She could manipulate my parents and drive a wedge between them. She was just an incredibly intelligent person and incredibly evil. And having met someone like that, it made me able to understand, and even though I didn't want to, accept the fact that people like this exist, whether you want to believe it or not. And if you trust them, you are only ever going to get hurt by them again. So this is an experience which I think is somewhat unique. I think most people have not met someone like this. And I mean, we might watch true crime documentaries or things like this, and we know that technically these people are real, but they exist on Netflix or in someone else's lives, and we never once believe that it could be someone we know, or that it could be someone living next door, or that it could be someone that our children play with. So if she even had 2 minutes with one of her younger siblings where no one was within earshot, she would tell them, hey, Mom's going to go check the mail. I just saw the mail truck go. When she's doing that, I want you to go run into her bedroom and go into her jewelry, or go and get this for me and we'll split it. Go and get that food that Mom said we can't have till the weekend or something. So she was an incredibly corrupting influence on anyone around her that she could exert her influence on.
Was Grace actually removed from your family?
Yes.
Describe the event that prompted her removal from your family.
I discovered a diary that she had made where she described in detail my parents having their eyes gouged out and dying, and how once my parents were out of the way and dead, she would be able to assume her role as rightful queen of the country. So she just had these psychopathic delusions of violence and grandeur. And we called the SS and asked them to remove her from the home.
After Grace/Yelena had left the family, things reportedly improve within the Hughes household, and life moves forward. Zachary continues to pursue his dream of being a successful musician, and by 15 years old, the family had relocated to Travelers Rest in Greenville, South Carolina. Zach's life revolves around music. He's homeschooled and regarded as quite intelligent, and after his father builds a soundproof room in the garage, he spends hours upon hours every day practicing long into the night. Zachary participates in music festivals and international competitions. He performs very well in each of these events, and eventually is awarded a full-paid scholarship to Juilliard Music Conservatory in Manhattan. Here he begins his formal education during fall of 2011. Throughout his time here, the achievements are numerous. I won't go into detail for each one, but as an example, he was awarded a spot to participate in an international music festival in Kyoto. 15 to 20 students from around the world were given this opportunity, and he was the only musician from America to perform. May 2015, Zachary graduates with a Bachelor's of Music and Piano Performance. Following his formal education, and after doing a range of music-based work, such as freelancing and solo gigs, Zach eventually decides that he'd like to refocus his life on something that doesn't revolve around music. Although he was currently employed playing in a symphony, he leaves that position and attempts to join the army, specifically the Marines.
You're a classically trained pianist. You have an opportunity with a symphony to perform with them, which is regular employment, and you decide to leave that and go serve your country in the Marine Corps. Is that correct?
Yes. Since about my sophomore year of college, it had been something I'd been thinking about, military service. And obviously there's a window of time that you're able to do that in as you get older. You hit age limits and so forth. And it had just always been something I was interested in, the service to others aspect of it. I felt like, in a sense, I owed a debt to my country and to do some military service. And I also wanted the opportunity to experience a difficult training environment. And I figured the Marines they had a reputation of being the hardest, so that's the branch I decided to go for.
When the military learns that he has a college degree, they push him to pursue a position with the military band, but Zach does not want this. He's adamant that he'd like to be in the infantry, down in the trenches on the front line, seeing as he believed this would provide the most challenge. Eventually, he starts an officer training program. The rigorous training results in the man suffering level 3 stress fractures in both tibia. Essentially, his legs were broken. He returns home to his parents' house to heal, and although the military urged him to return when he recovered, he never does.
At this time, do you consider yourself a United States Marine?
No, I do not.
Why?
That's a title you have to earn, and since I haven't completed my training, I did not earn it.
Late January 2019, Zach is around 27 years old and returns to playing the piano in various settings. At one point, even organizing church events where he attempted to perform all 32 of Beethoven's sonatas, an achievement not many musicians have accomplished. He's making his way through these performances well, until the fateful COVID strikes, and all events are put on hold. Summer of 2020, Zachary has decided to continue performing on the streets, and during one of his gigs, a man with his young daughter approaches to admire the music being played.
That was John Mello.
Was John Mello by himself, or was anyone with him?
He was with his daughter. I didn't know who he was, but he came up and said he was a musician and asked if I'd be willing to take a request. He said his daughter's favorite piece was Claire de Lune, and I know that piece really well. It's a favorite piece of mine, so I played it for her.
What, if anything, did you observe about while you were playing Claire de Lune?
Like I said, she was 8, so she was pretty young. I had taught a lot of kids before, so I had experience with kids that age and their attention spans, which tend to be very short. So I was really impressed. I could see her out of the corner of my eye, and she was just enraptured from start to finish. She wasn't running around. She wasn't on a device. She was just completely caught up in the music, and that made a big impression on me.
After Zach finishes his street performance, he and John talk for a little. They bond over both their experiences in the music world and agree to meet up for coffee sometime to continue talking. He describes John as a great conversationalist. He's charismatic, outgoing, and over the next few months, they meet up 6 to 7 times over lunch, coffee, and art galleries. Each time, with the exception of one, John's daughter is present. This young girl had made quite the impression on Zachary.
She's a really special kid. She was definitely mature beyond her years, like I talked about. She could hold a conversation with adults. She looked you in the eye. She seemed really cultured, like she'd had a lot of exposure to different places. She'd traveled like almost as much as I had. She was always telling me about trips she and her dad had taken, and it was just very evident to me that she was a very healthy, loved child. She clearly loved her dad, and it was obvious that he had done a great job raising her. And I was convinced that she was a happy, healthy kid, and he was a great father.
October of 2020. It's Zachary's birthday, and he plans to meet up with John to celebrate. When they get together, John's daughter is not with them, as she currently has visitation with her mother. The two friends go to grab tacos, and although the mood of the evening is pleasant for the most part, by the end of the night, John's demeanor completely changes.
Towards the end, at one of these taco stands, he became very pensive and even distraught. And he started to tell me about really grave concerns he had about his daughter, specifically when his daughter was with her mother, Christina Parcell. And he essentially said that whenever his mother had visitation, he just never could rest easy until he got back, and that he just didn't trust her, and he thought that she wasn't responsible and that she might even hurt her at some point. And I mean, frankly, the mood of the evening took a big dip because of this. It was clear that he just was terrified about the danger his daughter was in, and this made a big impression on me.
Later that very month, John makes the decision to take his daughter to Italy indefinitely, a move that Zachary approves of.
I thought it was great. I knew at this point that John's parents were Italian, and I thought stood to gain a great cultural experience from it. And I just thought if I had had the opportunity to travel and live in Italy when I was 8, I would have jumped at that. So I was really excited for both of them. Based on what John had told me about his mother, I thought it was good that there was distance in between them. And our communications had died off a bit after they left. John is interesting. He's also a lot. He's a very dramatic person, and it was a bit of a relief to just not be running into him downtown all the time, because I had a lot of practice I was doing, and sometimes I didn't have time to hang out as much as he might have wanted to. So our communications petered out.
April 2021. John reaches out to Zach, who he hadn't been communicating with much over the last few months, and he informs him that Christina was working hard to get her daughter back to the United States. John says that he's incredibly worried that she might be successful, and he feels like he's going to lose his daughter. Not too long after this conversation, Zach receives a message which troubles him deeply.
He sent me a message, and it was clear from the text that he was very upset, just saying that, Zach, they took, what am I going to do? Something about along those lines. At this point, I found myself in kind of a conundrum, because like I said, I had appreciated having some distance from John. But by the same token, I was becoming increasingly more concerned about his daughter. So while I might have wanted to not continue communicating with John for the sake of his daughter, I felt that I had a certain sense of responsibility to help him with what he was dealing with this custody battle for his daughter's sake. We began communicating probably every day, at least by text, often by phone calls. I was giving a lot of time towards hearing what he had to say, towards trying to help him in any way I could. Some of the things I did to help him were, first, he needed counsel. He needed a lawyer in family court. So I was calling a bunch of lawyers in Greenville, trying to find someone who could help him. And by helping him, I ended up cleaning his house in Greenville. He had left it with a tenant who absolutely trashed it. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. Like, the air was hardly breathable. So I was buying a dehumidifier, getting cleaning supplies, hiring Mikey Manigo, who testified last week, to help me clean out his house so that he would have a place to show family court, and, you know, that he had a home that would be a safe place for a little girl and him to be living in. I told him when he came back, I'd pick him up from the airport.
These are email communications between Zach Hughes and John Mello.
Is Zach Hughes either what I'll call CC'd or blind copied on emails from John Mello to various family court attorneys?
Yes, there are a lot of those emails that John Mello sends to attorneys or other people regarding the child custody dispute. Zach Hughes is either CC'd on them or blind copied on them.
All right. Are there emails where Zach Hughes assists John Mello in writing emails or maybe papers regarding the child custody dispute, or corrects or edits some of that information regarding the child custody for John Mello?
There are.
Are there emails where John Mello tells the family court attorney that Zach Hughes is allowed to communicate with the attorney?
Yes.
And that is regarding the child custody case over he and Christina Parcell's daughter?
Yes, sir.
And are there emails where Zach Hughes himself is communicating directly with John Mello's family court attorney?
Yes, sir.
And are there instances where Zach Hughes is running errands or doing things in furtherance of the child custody?
Yes, sir.
And are there emails between Zach Hughes and John Mello discussing the child custody?
There are lots of them.
And finally, were the emails, were they caring for each other?
Yes.
In what way?
There's messages in there where one tells the other they love them. The other one will say, love you back.
As John talks with Zach more and more regarding his concerns related to the custody dispute, Zachary learns details about Christina's life prior to having a daughter that he finds disturbing. The first of the information that's shared with him are the nude photographs that were discussed earlier in the video. The packages sent initially were believed to have come from John himself, but Zach confirms that it was he who sent those articles out.
These photographs were of Christina Parcell in various stages of undress. And John told me that they were prostitution advertisements from her previous career as a prostitute. And looking at these photographs, there was no doubt in my mind that that's what these were. And I don't say this in any way to try to shame. It's simply that, I mean, who said it? Like pornography, you know it when you see it. Well, I think the same can be said in terms of these photographs. They were not cute, sexy, intimate photographs that someone might send to someone they're dating or something. They were lewd and tasteless, and there was a very clear element of advertising, a commercial element. Coupled with this was a deposition from 2016 that Christina Parcell had given. Based on various things she freely admitted to in her deposition, that she had a history of using and manipulating men in order to get money and in offering sexual services in return. She admitted to being a pornographic actress and producing a film in South Carolina where she rubbed her feet on a man's penis. She admitted to using SugarDaddyForMe.com, where she sought out romantic relationships with older men with a clear emphasis on it being a trade, essentially a reciprocal thing, where she was seeking out to be taken care of financially. And I began to send these mailers to Christina Parcell and her boyfriend and people in the neighborhood for a threefold purpose. I wanted parents around that neighborhood to know that their children were not safe around her or around Brad Post. I wanted different people associated with this, such as the guardian ad litem, the police, to have access to this information so that they would have all the evidence that I was looking at that clearly demonstrated that Christina Parcell was a danger to children and her own daughter. And I also wanted there to be social pressure on Christina Parcell because I was hoping that it wouldn't be worth it to her for other people to see her for what she was in exchange for her trying to fight to have her daughter.
And the effect those mailers had do anything to alleviate your concerns?
No, they didn't. If anything, Christina Parcell and Brad Post just dug their heels in deeper.
In addition to the collection of information Zach had received thus far, he also obtained from John an affidavit written by a fire department officer who believed they had encountered Christina Parcell in 2018. This document goes over the details of that meeting.
I was at Hall's Chop House in downtown Greenville, South Carolina, when a woman approached me. She said hello and proceeded to ask if I was looking for a date. She said something to the effect of inviting me to bed for an amount of money and that we would not be rushed at all. When I refused her proposition, she proceeded to offer me narcotics, I refused and ended the encounter at that point.
It's at this point, after the packages in the mail were unsuccessful in getting Christina to back off from the custody dispute. Feeling desperate, John sends Zach a message saying, quote, "Harass the shit out of her."
Why would you ask him to harass her? Because I was angry, but I wanted him to if you read it, here's her phone number. I meant take out ads on Craigslist advertising there's puppies at her house for sale. That kind of, bug her.
So I made a phone call to Child Protective Services, and I told them that I was a neighbor. So I told them that I had seen being verbally and physically abused by her mother. And again, I made that up. That's not true. But I said it because I wanted to give an opportunity to have FaceTime in person with an agent from DSS away from her mother, where she could tell them that her mother was sexually abusing her.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. You are to disregard.
And so, did they do anything to alleviate your concerns?
No.
Did that surprise you at all?
No.
Zach also contacts authorities, telling them that the daughter is being abused by her mother. But again, the allegations are unable to be proven, and nothing results from the report. In addition to what Zach is doing, John, still in Italy, is stepping up his intensity towards his daughter's child advocate, telling her that his child is suffering abuse at the hands of Christina and Bradley.
I don't hold back when I'm the guardian, so if he's making allegations and I'm asking him, please substantiate these. If you're going to accuse the mother of this, please give me substantiation and I will investigate this. If he says neighbors are watching something, please give me the neighbors' names. I have the ability as guardian to bring a motion before the court to have her removed if the court has substantiation of the concerns. And he would just play games and tell me he couldn't give me the names of the witnesses he knew about because he needed to save them when he sued me in civil litigation. And so he was very aware that I was not a fan of how he conducted himself. If you're worried about a child enough to make substantial allegations, and this guardian is appointed only for her interests, please work with me. Even if we had differences, set them aside, help me help your child. And he was definitely not cooperative.
Believing that he was losing the custody dispute, everything they had tried was not working. In May of 2021, John contacts Zach and makes a request of him.
Given the extremely grave nature of John's concerns for his daughter, especially while she was in the custody of her mother, Christina Parcell, and potentially being exposed to her mother's boyfriend, Brad Post, who John believed was a pedophile and is a pedophile.
Objection. Sustained. I instruct you to totally disregard.
Could you just tell this jury what John asked you to do?
Yes. Given his concerns, John asked me that if I believed his daughter was in grave danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $5,000?
What did you say when he asked you that?
I was shocked and insulted by the request, and I gave him an immediate and unequivocal no.
Did you ask him to kill her? Of course not. It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. And I'll tell you another thing. So you did ask Zachary Hughes to harass her? In that text? Yeah. Okay. I'm like, harass the crap. You didn't ask him to kill her? Of course not. And again, the 1,700 texts, where are the texts of me asking him to do that? I've been in family court with Christina Parcell for 10 years, right? Up and down, all things like that. If I was going to do something like that, it would have happened a long time ago, right?
How long after the first offer did he make the second offer?
I'm not certain, but I would say maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. He was becoming increasingly more worried and distressed about the safety of his daughter. I was as well. The more I learned about this situation and everything, and a lot more than what I've told you, I was also...
Sustained. What was the second offer?
The second offer, he asked me again, if I became convinced that his daughter was in danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $10,000?
What did you, or how did you respond to that offer?
I told him, John, there's no amount of money that would ever tempt me to do something like this. And I told him I was insulted that he even thought that would be something I would consider. So I told him I would never do something like this for money. I told him the only way I would ever consider taking action like this is if I was absolutely convinced that his daughter was not only in danger, but that the only way to rescue her from that danger would be to take Christina Parcell's life.
By this point, Zach is experiencing a great deal of stress due to his communications with John, compounded by a strenuous practice schedule. He decides to take a vacation from his piano work and visits John in Italy, where he stays for 3 weeks. During this time period, he observes a number of video phone calls that John shares with his daughter.
John had been telling me for weeks, Zach, Christina's killing my little girl. Like, I can see the spark dying in her eyes. And again, when I first heard that, I thought, aren't you being a little dramatic? Like, I hadn't seen her, but it just seemed a bit much. When I saw her in these visits, I didn't feel that way anymore. She was not the same little girl that I had known in Greenville when I first met them. She had put on a great deal of weight, probably about 20 pounds, which is roughly a quarter of her body weight. For an 8-year-old girl, that's a lot in a short period of time, but it was much more than that. It was her demeanor. Her spirit was just, she was morose, she was depressed, like that spunky, precocious, lively little girl that I had met was just not present there. It was a complete change in character.
In visiting her in school and talking to her teacher, she was thriving here. She was doing so well in her mother's custody, living with her aunt. They had Taco Tuesdays and, anyway, she loved sushi and avocado, and she was just living a very full life. When I visited, she was riding bikes with the neighbor kids, making friendships.
I mean, John would ask her how she was doing, and she would always try to give a good response. Like, she would try to smile and say, "I'm fine, Daddy," and try to put on a good face. But it was clear that she was doing that because she didn't want to worry her dad. She didn't want him to realize how poorly she was doing, and she was trying to be stronger than she was probably ready to be at that age. And despite the stoic, strong exterior she was trying to put on, I could just see that she was being tortured. Like, she was drowning, and him saying that the spark was dying in her eyes was absolutely accurate. I could see it, I could hear it in her voice, I could tell it in her demeanor. He started describing Christina Parcell's character and her personality. And as he was going through various points, he kept saying, "Zach, I know you're not going to believe me. Like, I know this sounds overblown and dramatic, and you probably think I'm exaggerating." And under other circumstances, I would have, because John he's a big storyteller, and, you know, when people are talking about their exes, like, everyone thinks their ex is the Antichrist. So, of course, I was sort of predisposed to be biased against what he was telling me, except for the fact that point by point, everything he described about Christina Parcell was exactly the same as my sister Grace. He told me that Christina Parcell was a master manipulator. He said she can lie at the drop of the hat and you'll never know it. He said she was incredibly charming. He said she was incredibly intelligent and talented. He used to say she was smarter than he was, but that her biggest fault was that she was lazy. And she had this arrogance combined with her laziness that was essentially born out of the fact that she knew she never really had to work too hard at anything in life. And she could even sacrifice trust with people and tell them lies that could easily be found out, because ultimately she was completely confident in her ability to reel someone back in, no matter how bad she had burned them before. And he could have been describing Grace to me because I knew this behavior. I had lived through this behavior, despite the fact that he can exaggerate and overblow the truth, and he's often not very believable when you listen to him. I was convinced at that point that he must be describing something true, because no one would know how to describe it so specifically and accurately if they were just making it up. And I was right to believe him.
At the end of September, beginning of October 2021, did you conclude that you had to rescue and there was no other way?
Yes, I did.
And ultimately, did you take Christina Parcell's life on October the 13th?
Yes, because I believed it was absolutely necessary to save her. And I was right.
Objection, Your Honor. Sustained. I ask you to disregard the testimony that you just heard.
So I was having this incredible wrestling match within myself for these months, feeling that I needed to do something to save her, and yet feeling this incredible reluctance to do the one thing that I knew would save her, because of how terrible I knew it would be to do it, even though I believed it would be right. So by the time October 13th rolled around, I had been grappling with this for a long time, and I was experiencing a tremendous amount of guilt that I had waited as long as I did, because I should have acted sooner, and I didn't do that. So I had come to the realization that I had gotten this offer to go on this cruise ship, and I would have been leaving the country for a long time. Essentially, it was now or never. I had an opportunity to save her from a danger that I knew she was in, and that I knew was not going to cease. And I just couldn't go on with my life and leave her to drown. I mean, I had a great life. I had everything. I made money doing what I loved. I was going to be going to the South Pacific to play concerts for rich people on cruise ships. I mean, but how could I go and enjoy that and know that I was leaving a kid to her fate, a kid who thought that I was her friend? I would never have been able to look at myself in the mirror again if I had done that. I had come to the point where rationally I knew that the only way I was going to be saved from what she was enduring was for me to take this route. I knew that. But there's another element, a human element, which is just so reluctant and revulsed by the idea of taking a human life. And I was so terrified that somehow I might be doing the wrong thing. Like, I knew that it was right logically, but there's the emotional aspect was just reeling against this idea. Physically driving my truck there, I was experiencing a level of anxiety and physical illness that I had just never experienced due to stress before. My hands were shaking. I was in a cold sweat, and I was fighting the urge to vomit before I even got close there. A few times I thought I was going to have to pull off to the side of the road because I could hardly keep my truck straight. My hands were shaking so badly. So I just tried to take my mind off of it, and I tried to just go and drive a little bit farther and a little bit farther and not think about what I was going to have to do when I got there. And when I finally got to the point where I parked my truck, this feeling only increased. I knew the plan, but I was having so much difficulty going through with it. So I took my bike out of the truck, and I had a mask on and clothing that's been described already. And I just tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other on my bike. And I kept pedaling, and eventually I arrived in front of 122 Canebrake. I laid my bike down in the driveway, and I took my backpack off, and I took out the box that had been gift wrapped, that had an end open, and I put the .22 revolver in that box. And I put the backpack back on my back, and I took a bunch of roses, and I walked up to the door, and I rang the doorbell. And I was shaking and freaking out at this point, because there was nowhere I wanted to be less than at that house on that morning. And when I rang the doorbell, the door opened and a woman came to the front. And I thought it was Christina Parcell, but I wanted to make sure. And I also wanted to make sure that no one else was home. So I told her that while I was holding the box and the roses, that I had a delivery for Lutina Parcell, her sister. And she told me that Lutina wasn't home. So at this point I realized that Christina was at the house alone. And I handed her the roses, and I took the revolver out of the box, and I pointed it at her, and I told her to be quiet and to go back into the house, which she did. And I followed her into the house, and I shut the door. My plan had been to try to knock her unconscious, because I didn't want to cause her or anyone any pain. That wasn't my intention. So when I went to strike her with the gun, my hand didn't really do what I was trying to tell it to. I essentially pulled my strike. At this point, she realized that I was hesitating, and she began to try to move herself and to get away and to fight back. And during this period of time, the roses had dropped and the petals and stems had scattered. And as I was hesitating, I realized that the situation was quickly getting out of control. So I pulled out the knife I was wearing. And even though I knew I wasn't going to be able to strike her with any amount of force, I still tried. It wasn't stopping her, and it wasn't inflicting anything that could be a fatal blow. And she started to fight back. So I just kept striking her until finally we fell on the floor. I don't remember how many times I struck her. I just remember that when it finished, we were on the ground, and I stopped striking her when she stopped struggling. I stood up, and I was still freaking out, and I was in kind of a daze. And I was just trying to pull myself together, and I drew the blinds and I moved her body away from the door, which had windows, because I didn't want someone to come to the door and see her. And I put my things back in the backpack, and I looked in a mirror before I left to make sure everything was in order, and I saw that she had scratched my face in the struggle. And of course I realized that this could leave DNA. So I used the paint thinner to try to clean her hands, and then I left. I exited out through the door, and I got back on my bike, and I pedaled my bike back to the truck, and I drove back to the mountain house. And I was still completely freaking out, and it felt entirely surreal. But there is a big difference in how I felt, in that as soon as I left the house, I felt the most enormous wave of relief wash over me, because I knew from that moment on I would be safe. I would be safe from the sexual abuse that her mother was perpetrating on her. And there is proof to that the state is hiding from you.
Instruct him to be quiet.
Okay, you need to stop talking. The jury.
I had been absolutely convinced that Christina Parcell was sexually abusing her daughter.
Let's go.
Take the jury.
Part of my role is to make determinations about what evidence can and cannot be admitted and presented to you, the jury. The gatekeeping role rests solely with me, the judge on the law, and I want to instruct you that you're not to consider any testimony that I have instructed you to disregard. Furthermore, you should not even mention or discuss any testimony that I have instructed you to disregard, and I instruct you not to discuss any topics that have been ruled improper.
It was at this point in the trial that I had heard numerous times from Zachary the allegations of sexual abuse perpetrated by Christina Parcell and Bradley Post against the young girl. Each time he brought the subject up, an objection rang through from the state. Scratching my head a little, I had begun to wonder about certain details that popped up throughout the trial thus far. For instance, when Bradley Post took the stand, the usually well-dressed, wealthy-looking man was now donned in a prison jumpsuit. The reason for his new attire was never discussed in front of the jury.
Where do you currently reside?
Greenville County Detention Center.
And have you been charged with a crime?
Yes.
You were also asked if you've been charged with a crime. It's actually 9 charges, is it not?
Correct.
In addition to that, there were tiny hints throughout this trial that another investigation was running alongside the murder case for Christina.
And isn't it true, after you conducted an extraction of Brad Post's cell phone, you contacted a member of the Greenville County Sheriff's Office?
Objection, Judge. Based on your previous ruling, this line of questioning is improper.
Your Honor, this...
Overruled.
Thank you.
Watch.
Yes, Your Honor. Isn't it true that you contacted investigator Wayne Arnett with the Greenville County Sheriff's Office after you conducted the extraction? Isn't that true?
I did not contact him, but I'm aware that other investigators were contacted, yes.
And isn't it true that your extraction was made available to investigator Wayne Arnett? Isn't that true?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Bradley Post's phone was not collected by law enforcement on October 13th of 2021. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And are you aware now from your investigation, by looking at the body cameras of other officers, that he was deleting photographs from his phone while waiting for law enforcement to arrive?
I'm not aware of that, no, sir.
Did you watch all the body cameras?
Oh, I believe I did.
Okay. So you don't remember that, him saying that?
I don't recall that, no, sir.
But he certainly had the phone from the incident date until October the 19th of 2021 and had every opportunity to delete and manipulate his phone in any way. Okay, so
I know that he had possession of his phone until the 19th, yes, sir.
I was thoroughly intrigued as to what's going on here, so I decided to do a little digging outside of the trial, and within a short amount of time, uncovered some haunting information. 2 weeks after Christina's death, Bradley's phone and other electronic devices were seized, and what they discovered on these items is horrific. Thousands upon thousands of pictures and videos depicting the sexual abuse of children, all being perpetrated by Bradley himself. What is most distressing is that in some of these videos, allegedly, Christina Parcell was present. I say allegedly because the case against Bradley hasn't reached trial yet. If you look on screen now, I'll put up some court documents pertaining to 2 separate cases which allege that video and images of child abuse can be found on his devices, with both he and Christina participating in the abuse. In one case, it's directly tied to the victim being Christina and John's daughter, and the other relates to a friend of the daughter who would often come and stay with Christina. There is a third case, which I couldn't find court documents for, but a number of articles allege the same documented abuse recorded by Bradley and Christina against a third child, a relative of Christina. The cases against Bradley have also been brought against Christina's estate, seeing as she is no longer alive, and all of them are still underway. No conclusion has been reached as of the recording of this video. Again, I would like to make it clear that these allegations are just that, evidence that the state supposedly has and will bring to trial to reach a judgment. Prior to Zachary Hughes' trial taking place, a court ruling was made to ensure that any information relating to these cases would not be heard by the jury.
And it was in conjunction with our motion to exclude evidence relating to the case against Brad Post, who is going to be a witness in this case. Your Honor's familiar with. He's been charged by the state of South Carolina as being prosecuted by the Attorney General's office for sexual exploitation of a minor. That case occurred about 2 weeks. Those charges were brought against Brad Post about 2 weeks after the murder of Christina Parcell. And so we filed a motion for a gag order for the purpose of keeping those statements out of the record and out of the press and from reporting on it, because the state felt that it was prejudicial. And it was in conjunction with our motion to exclude evidence of child pornography that is allegedly found on Brad Post. And I say allegedly because Brad Post has not been convicted. He's been charged with sexploitation of a minor first and third, and I believe buggery, based on lots of videos and photographs that were located on his phone and thumb drives and computers. He just happened to be the fiance of Christina Parcell. Your Honor, at the end of the day, going into his particular crime would serve this jury absolutely no purpose as to whether Zach Hughes committed this crime or not. Again, at this stage in the proceedings. If this jury hears about any child pornography related to the victim in this particular case, you cannot unring that bell. You cannot unring that bell, and it is highly, highly prejudicial. And so we would ask, Your Honor, restrict their cross-examination and of course, our direct examination to non-child pornography-related testimony regarding the defendant and the victim in this case.
With the information provided in these court documents, we can speculate that abuse was occurring under the care of Christina Parcell and Bradley Post. But it is important to note that this information was uncovered only after the death of Christina. When Zach had made the decision to kill her, he did not have that information, and due to court rulings having evidence suppressed, it is unclear what sort of information he obtained that gave him the confidence to believe that sexual abuse was occurring. From the best of my ability, all we know about is what John had provided him: photographs of potential sex work, spoken words that the abuse against his daughter was real, and Zach's own observations of the girl's demeanor through video calls. Following the death of Christina Parcell, her daughter is placed in emergency protective custody, then into foster care, and finally into the care of her auntie Tina. Tina was living with Christina at the time of her death, and at no point provides any inkling that she knew of any of these allegations against her sister and Bradley Post. Tina reaches an agreement with John Mello in August of 2023, and he regains custody of his daughter, but this doesn't last long. At the time of this trial in 2025, following Zachary Hughes' testimony informing the court that John had offered to pay him to kill his ex-partner, John is arrested and charged with accessory before the fact. His case is still pending.
No bond for a man now arrested in connection to a complex upstate murder case. John Mello is charged with solicitation to commit a felony and accessory before the fact of murder.
Moving back to Zachary's trial now. Following his testimony, both sides would have the opportunity to provide closing statements to the jury.
Regardless of what he may believe in his head, his actions are what matter in this courtroom. Actions speak louder than words. And boy, do we have a lot of cold, calculated, horrific actions in this case. Zach Hughes is trying to portray himself on that stand as a hero instead of the cold-blooded killer that he is. Ladies and gentlemen, we judge the defendant by their actions, not by their excuses or their words. Actions speak much louder than any self-serving lies from a sadistic, pathological killer like Zach Hughes. The absurdity of many of his words, and I'll reference a couple. I wanted to make her death quick and painless. This is what he said. When I was listening to that, it was hard for me to comprehend that someone is actually saying that at their trial to a jury. Do we say thank you? I appreciate it. Thank you for taking my pain into consideration as you murder me? What does that even mean? Well, I ask you this. Was it quick and painless when he hit her in the head with a gun? Was it quick and painless when he stabbed her the first time? Was it quick and painless when he stabbed her the second time? How about the 5th? The 10th? Maybe the 20th? He was being considerate. Maybe the 30th? How about the final 35th blow? But he described his sister Grace in great detail as well, for some reason. He said she was a horrific person when confronted with irrefutable evidence. She would go cold, stone-faced. She would manipulate and recruit others to do a terrible deed. If you trust Grace, you're only going to get hurt again. She was a vampire and would suck the blood right out of you. Maybe he's describing himself. Regardless of what Zach Hughes had in his mind or what he thinks he had into his heart, he's lying to himself. Because all he had was hate and meanness, coldness. He brutally murdered Christina Parcell.
This is what Zach believed. This is a mother. The person who's charged with caring for your child. Most importantly. The person of all on the whole planet who is supposed to be the most nurturing. This is the person who is doing this to the child. The person who lives with the child. The evidence was the person who shared a room with the child. The person who's with the child all the time. So in a situation like that, where you have a belief that's grounded on documents, that's grounded on information shared with you over many, many months, when you have that belief, how do you alleviate that threat, the threat from the mom, without thinking through how to do it? How do you do that? And so I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the planning in this case, unlike most any other case, doesn't show malice because the mom was the threat. The mom was the one who posed the danger. Zach agonized over it. What do I do? Over time, he continued to get information. What do I do? He didn't want to do it. If he wanted to do it, he would have done it right away. And he told you that when he testified. He told you in detail about that day. He told you about it. He doesn't think he's a hero. He's never asked that. He did what he believed he had to do to save an innocent child. Does a person who kills another person with the intent to save an innocent child, does that person have evil in their heart? Does that person have an angry heart? Ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest to you that your common sense would tell you no. And that person who killed another to save an innocent child is not a murderer.
Zachary is found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. At the end of the case here, I truly felt conflicted. And by the way, I've moved away from presenting the facts of the trial and now speak about my thoughts and opinions. I'll go through why I feel so torn up about this one. Often in cases, we have a clear villain, an evil individual motivated by selfish reasons to commit whatever heinous actions they feel suits their needs at the time of the crime. But here, Zachary's motivations, at least portrayed through the trial, appear to be much more nuanced. He believed that he was rescuing a young girl from abuse, and according to allegations in upcoming cases, he may have been correct in believing the things he believed. What troubles me is the self-righteous nature of his beliefs. Had he been provided actual evidence that the abuse was occurring, surely he would have submitted that to authorities. He was more than willing to send around imagery of Christina in less than favorable light, so why not send through the hard-hitting evidence that supported he and John's claims? I believe it's because he didn't have anything. All he was working with was the suspicions from his own observations, and the words from a dramatic and desperate father, one who has a history of harassment campaigns and threatening behavior. Although Zachary may have been correct in this instance, how easily it could have swung the other way, and he could have murdered a completely innocent woman based on being manipulated by his friend. That worries me, because it makes me think that at any given time, Zach was only one wrong conversation from harming an innocent person. But let's talk about the possibility if these allegations are true. In that instance, a young girl was saved from any further abuse. If this is the case, was his vigilante justice justified? Despite me not losing any sleep over an abuser not being around anymore, in my opinion, the answer is no. It's never justified. Despite he believing that there was no other way, I think otherwise. There's always another way. Private investigations, encouraging the child to speak to law enforcement and child advocates. He could have even tried to conduct his own investigation and gather his own video evidence of any crimes occurring. I do understand that it's difficult to believe that a mother would harm their own child in such a way, but to jump to murder after a few failed attempts to contact authorities and CPS, it doesn't sit right with me. It's unhinged. His whole story about knowing what evil looks like based on his experiences with that 10-year-old girl Yelena, again, it doesn't sit right. The way he described Yelena's behavior was seriously concerning, and not for the reasons he would want people to believe. To me, it sounded like Yelena was a victim of abuse herself, a traumatized young 10-year-old girl that was sent to a strange country to live with a strange family, and she was having trouble adjusting. A point of interest about that story is that when Yelena was taken from the care of the family, she had begun to speak to CPS about what her life was like under the Hughes' care. According to Zach, Yelena lied to them for weeks and constructed stories that CPS ended up believing. Zach describes that Yelena was so evil and so manipulative that she was able to convince numerous experts that her side of the story was truthful. What it sounds like to me is that the experts likely listened to what was happening to this 14-year-old girl and deemed her treatment unacceptable under that family's care. I do want to make it clear though that no reports are to be found anywhere that this family is anything other than loving and supportive. My thoughts here are pure speculation and brought on by my inability to believe that a 10-year-old girl could be the evil vampire that is described. But hey, maybe she could have been. Maybe Zach did come up against a monster back then, and now walks through the rest of his life with an experience that many other humans don't have. Maybe he's special, knows more than others. Maybe he can identify evil just by looking at it. I suspect not though. I suspect he may have a bit of an inflated ego based on his achievements in life, and this has led him to use the intelligence that he so clearly has to construct an interpreted reality that supports his likely somewhat incorrect views of the world and the people around him. A complicated character in an even more complicated scenario, marbled with custody dispute and allegations of abuse. This leads me to one question though. Did he receive a fair trial? My answer again is no. I think the suppression of evidence related to sexual abuse, although understandable why it was suppressed, seeing as it was evidence found after the murder and information that he didn't have access to, I do think there is more to this story that we will never know about. Potentially conversations that he had with the young girl, where she outlined what was happening to her. Maybe even articles of evidence that he had unearthed about Bradley Post, which contributed to his conviction that abuse was occurring. We'll never know the truth behind what Zach actually knew when he decided to take a life. Now, the reason I say I don't think the trial was fair is because even if this evidence were allowed in, I don't think it would have affected the outcome of the trial. All it would have done, in my opinion, is support the idea that he indeed acted with malice and hatred. He learned information, it affected him deeply, and he decided to plan and kill based on that. For the argument, just because he may have taken the life of an abuser, it doesn't mean it's not murder. Usually at the end of videos here, I tend to focus on the victim, but based on the allegations of abuse, I'll refrain from doing so in this one. If I look at Christina, while pretending that these allegations aren't circling around, at best, by reports of friends and family, she was an empathetic and caring person who brought a lot of positivity to the interactions around her. Using the most favorable light, one can speculate that all of this alleged abuse didn't begin until her relationship with Bradley Post had started. He clearly is a monster, a man with a record of child abuse, supposedly supported by thousands of videos on his devices. Time will tell how his case unfolds, but there is the potential that Christina would have never harmed her daughter without the influence of Brad Post backing that up. I think the person to focus on at the end here is their daughter. There is no information online about her, seeing as she is the victim in an ongoing sex crime case, and a minor, but my heart does go out to her. In her young life, she has known nothing but custody disputes, being moved around from location to location, and now the loss of her mother and her father behind bars. All I can say to wrap up is that I hope she lands on her feet, finds herself in a loving household, and manages to move forward from this, leading her life with nothing but happiness and good health.
I've had 3 years to try to articulate how this has impacted me, and I still have yet to find the words, and it won't happen tonight either. This defendant sat on that stand with full disregard for the authority of the law when it came to his actions outside of this courtroom, and blatant disregard for the authority of law inside this courtroom.
Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to speak a few words on my son's behalf. The trial is over. A verdict's been rendered, and we accept that. My son is probably, in my lifetime, and I've run into some pretty amazing people, and this is going to be seen as a bias from the father, but he has got such a strong moral compass and fortitude and desire for the truth in his life than really anyone I've ever met. He actually eclipses a lot of those things that I've aspired to myself.
He said the word repulsed, but did he once look repulsed? He said the word vomited. Did he ever once look nauseated as he described dragging my sister through my living room?
I want to address something, and Mr. Wilkins, that Zach is a cold-blooded killer. I am sorry. You heard him say in that chair, he wasn't going to go on a cruise ship to Bora Bora, where he was headed, and look at himself in the mirror at night after playing beautiful classical music for rich people. He couldn't do that.
He recounted step by step in excruciating detail everything he did. There has been no remorse once shown by this defendant in this courtroom. Without remorse, you cannot have rehabilitation. Rehabilitation requires acknowledgement that I have done a wrong, I have a debt to pay, and I can improve to become a better member of society. It begins with remorse.
Zach has been brutally honest in his life. So much, sometimes to the detriment of his own career. I'm just here, I'll wrap it up. As you determine your sentencing, I would ask you to consider what type of man he is.
I can't do anything but focus all my efforts on the well-being of my child.
Mello says he wanted their daughter away from Christina's fiance.
I want to see justice for his victims. I want sunlight shining on every player in this that did these children wrong. Throw them in the ground, or my daughter's old enough to make her own decision. I will fight for her. It's just that simple. There's no alternative.
And as we mentioned, Mello was arrested today after Hughes' testimony appeared in bond court just minutes ago. Mello shares a child with Parcell and was previously accused of conspiring with Hughes to harass Parcell. The relationship between Mello and Hughes has been a huge focus of this trial. And tonight, Fox County's Alexa Urbach is live at the Greenville County Detention Center, where Mello just went through bond court there.
One of the people in attendance at tonight's bond court hearing was Christina Parcell's sister, and she brought with her Christina Parcell's ashes, telling us that her sister deserved to be here this evening.
You did this to your family. Your child has to know that you did this to her family. I don't know where I will be when you go to trial, but I assure you, if I am at all capable, I will be there every day. When you are convicted, I will be there at every parole hearing. Everyone.